Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Group Chat, the #1 podcast in the world. We have a very special guest, Ben Braverman of Flexport Inc. He is here to talk all things supply chain, investing, and use big words. I mean, this man's words are big. His hands are big with big words. And it's a really incredible conversation. We first kick off what we all did for July 4th, and then we get into this awesome interview. Let's get into it.
Let's go.
Cash.
Ladies and gentlemen, Group Chat.
Cash.
It's $1 trillion. Hot.
Really interesting. If you were going to live anywhere in the world, Ben, and not work, where would you live?
LA.
It's funny you say that. What's because he was just asking. So Ben Braverman from Flexport's on the podcast today. We have an incredible interview right after we do a little bit of news. But he was asking where he should go have lunch, and I said you should go to Jones on 3rd. And Anand goes, that's where everyone goes who doesn't work.
Yep. LA, I've never seen restaurants this busy at lunch. You guys have figured out a way for seemingly a whole society to operate with no one doing anything real. It's amazing.
You live in Wyoming. What's anyone doing there?
We're
hunting for food? Is at lunchtime you got to go get a gun and shoot a decent elk?
We're taking down elk. We're pulling out trout. There's a hydroponic garden that grows lettuces. Okay. Lots of very real businesses.
So we're coming off of a big 4th of July weekend.
Yeah.
I mean, depending on where you live, America was very hot. Obviously, we live in LA, and I was leaving LA Saturday to go down to Orange County. And LA during this type of holidays is usually kind of quiet. Like the traffic's light. There's nothing too crazy. The beaches are very crowded, extremely crowded. But like, the center of town, you don't really see a lot of people. I was down in Orange County for the weekend with my in-laws. It's so interesting to see. Like, I didn't see in West Hollywood, one person wearing any American attire. I went down to Orange County. I did not see one single person not wearing American attire. And there was just a sense of pride in Orange County about America that, the center of LA did not have.
Right.
Which is really interesting.
Did you go to the OC during COVID at all?
Yeah.
It was open.
Yes,
There was no COVID in the OC ever.
I remember I had to.
they have a lot to celebrate. They overturned Roe v. Wade. They expanded gun laws.
They had a big week.
They had a big couple weeks. Climate change is off the table now.
Yeah, so
recent Supreme
Court. They have a lot of momentum going. But it was just interesting to see, and I was talking to some friends about it privately about just being because I saw a lot of people on Twitter I'm not celebrating 4th of July. That's what Republicans do. And I thought, whoa, that's a fucking insane statement. Because at the end of the day, the beauty of this country is you have the actual ability to impact change. You can actually do it, and you can gather and you can make that change. So if you don't like what you see or hear, 1, you can be a part of the change and actually get involved. 2, you can just shut up. 3, you can leave. Those are your options. But just to complain drives me nuts. And I get it. There's a lot of people that are upset with the way society is right now. But I just think you can't hate your fucking country. You shouldn't want to be there. Because the people that hate those other countries where they live, they fucking leave. That's why people immigrate to this country. So I think it's a very strong word. You could be unhappy with the climate, but to say you hate is a crazy word.
Were you seeing people saying hate?
On Twitter, I
could see
did.
people saying they're unhappy or unsettled.
I heard hate. I heard people say stuff like, I'm not going to celebrate 4th of July. I'm not a Republican. I celebrated 4th of July, and I'm not a Republican. And I had a great fucking time.
A lot of Democrats at the party.
Yeah, a lot of fine Democrats at the party. So I think it was an interesting, I get it. People are frustrated, but you still got to be, we're still better off than most places.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's easy to just basically, throw your hands up because people did this in 2016 when Trump got elected, at least on the coast.
Yeah.
People were like, oh, I'm leaving.
Yeah.
Whatnot.
No one left because real estate's through the roof. If everyone left, people could afford a home.
Apparently, the Green Day guy's leaving.
Is he?
He at a concert last week. He said he's leaving. He's going to pay the exit tax. He's done.
Where's he going?
He's moving to the UK because their
like that.
Their human rights track record is unblemished, unlike ours.
They literally have torpedoed the entire world for centuries.
So here's the interesting thing. Like, we all have friends that have been in Europe for the last 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah, people really did go to Europe for the last 6 weeks.
Every single one of my friends, I feel like, has been in Europe. I'll tell you what is different from their experience to what we're experiencing here is no one talks about that shit there. Meaning, like, you go to LA, you have a conversation
you're
about
talking
crime.
about people on the beach in Saint-Tropez drinking and doing drugs. Of course, they're not talking about politics.
Yeah, so maybe it's a better life. Fuck Jones on third. Go to Saint-Tropez.
Did you guys see a couple years ago? I can't remember what city it was in Italy. They released the town records going back to the 1500s, and they accidentally confirmed that all the same families that are rich in modern day Italy were rich in the 1500s. That I do think is one of the core advantages of America. They're like, do we have the amount of social mobility that maybe the narrative of the American dream would have promised? No. But is there some social mobility?
Of course. Yeah.
Yes.
No, I agree. But I guess once you make your money, what's the point of staying?
You try to go to Wyoming or Montana.
Yeah. So that's what you did.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I just think that, like, at the end of the day, like, you know, you gotta, because here's the thing is that, like, if you wake up just angry every day, it doesn't solve anything.
No.
Like, you know, you have to, like, be optimistic about change. Otherwise, and I think that's the beauty of America. Like, you can actually make a difference here. It's crazy as that is. And if you lived in China, you cannot make a difference.
I forget difference. I think what Ben said was the right thing is basically anyone can actually make it in America.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't matter who your parents are. I mean, sure, that all helps.
Yeah.
But you don't have to have a rich parent. You don't have to come from some pedigree.
Yeah.
And there's ways to make it.
Yeah.
Whereas that is very challenging in most countries in the world.
Yeah.
Like in India, it's like your destiny's written.
Yeah.
Like, we obviously have tons of family and
Yeah. If you're in the wrong caste, your destiny is written.
yeah.
It's one of the reasons startup culture in America is so spectacularly wonderful, and selling to American companies is such a joy. When you're doing sales in Europe, for those of you who've never done sales in Europe, like, so much of the sale is about your personal pedigree and your company pedigree, and not as much about, like, does your product solve a problem for the customer. That it can actually be really hard to make the transition from someone who's used to managing go to market just in the US to make the shift to Europe, where all of a sudden, like, if you want to, like Flexport, we learned if you want to go to market in Germany, you were going to hire a team in every little nook and cranny of Germany. And, like, the Bavarians don't want to buy from the other regions. It's like, it is all hyper local.
Yeah.
And the reasons they buy from each other are cultural. They're not necessarily about, like, oh, we're going to solve X business problem or Y business problem. It's about, like, what's your history?
Yeah. That's interesting. That's really interesting. Well, you know, on to July 4th. I went to a great party. I had a great time at Nobu Malibu. Shout out to H Wood and Revolve.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the best party in LA every year. It is just so much fun. There's something about daytime drinking that's just better than nighttime drinking.
I mean, it's also like one of the best venues in the world.
Yeah, on the beach in Malibu is obviously fantastic.
Did you eat? Or are you not a party eater?
I hate party eating.
You're not comfortable.
No. You know, I'm also wearing all white. I gotta look good.
You wore all white.
It's an all-white party. And not people. Just clothes. No, just clothes. You're wearing
will say,
white, all white.
I mean, I don't say this, like, kind of sarcastically, but the entire NBA was there.
Yeah.
Like,
A
every
lot of tall
NBA
people.
star.
A lot of tall people.
Every NBA star was there.
Yeah. I mean, NBA people are really the only... professional athletes are the only true recession-proof people in our economy.
Yeah.
It's true.
They look great.
Yeah, I mean, you saw Russ and his $47 million. You saw, like, every big...
Rudy Gobert, $250 million or whatever he got.
Yeah, he didn't even seem like he was drinking anything. He was just standing there with his $250 million. Obviously, incredible crowd. You'll see it all over social media. They had...
Can I share a fun Rudy Gobert story?
I don't know if there was such thing.
It's amazing.
No one. You should probably tell people who Rudy
Gobert he was a center for the Jazz. Now he plays for Timberwolves. 2-time NBA Defensive Player of the Year. Like legit star.
He's tall.
7'2", 7'3", something along those lines. So Friday morning, I go to Marina Del Rey in this random beach with my son, and it's like a school activity. They have like some sort of like play thing with a bunch of the kids and instructors. And I see Rudy Gobert training. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, you know, random beach. These guys are like doing wind sprints in the sand, like crazy shit.
That's why he gets paid the big bucks.
And then he became an internet sensation on Friday because Brian Windhorst went on First Take and basically predicted the trade that was going to happen. Yeah. And he became like a viral meme. Like he literally was trending on like Twitter the entire day on Friday. So I was joking to my friends like, oh, it's part of the Rudy Gobert Windhorst day. Like I saw him. Go to dinner Saturday night. Rudy Gobert sitting next to me.
Wow.
Go to Nobu. He's at the table next to us.
Wow, you guys are this is a friendship that's meant to be.
You didn't go say hi to him?
I had Zach B introduce me.
Okay.
And I told him there's a little language barrier. He's French.
Okay.
But he was super nice.
Did you vibe?
Yeah, he was cool. I was like, dude, I've literally spent the last 3 days with you.
Oh my God.
It's really hysterical.
That's funny. That is funny. But yeah, I mean, great party, awesome fun. You know, what'd you do, Ben?
I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, and we've been traveling as a family for about 3 months now. So everybody's tired. So we didn't do anything.
What's interesting is that, like, you know, I'll kind of dive into topics, but global travel is a complete disaster right now.
Yeah.
Our friend was coming back from Italy and was supposed to come to the party Monday. His flight got canceled. But yeah, his flight was canceled and he didn't make it back to LA. I've talked to so many countless people. Their luggages are lost. There's clearly a pilot shortage in Europe, specifically Lufthansa, I think, has the biggest. I think they're the biggest, one of the biggest European airlines. And our friends actually just came back from Italy and we saw them yesterday and they were like, it's just too crowded. Airports are too crowded. Traveling, getting a restaurant reservation is too crowded. Everything. It's like, basically what happened to like the supply chain happened to people traveling. And it feels like, I asked them like, would you do it again? They're like, everyone has told me I'm never leaving the country ever again because it's been so frustrating. As someone that's been traveling with your family, how's that been?
We've only been in the US, but what I will tell you is everything is literally 100% more expensive than it was like pre-COVID. Like every hotel,
so they were saying
every
this
short-term rental,
said it was 25 to 50% from last year.
Yeah,
which I don't know if last year was inflated or not.
So I think no one wants to talk about it, but of like the best shit, inflation is actually like running 100 to 200% year over year.
Tier 1 stuff,
like tier 1 anything, like whether it's like
Four Seasons,
the best car, the best hotel, the best restaurant, all of it's running at like right around 100% inflation.
Yeah. If you're looking at the Hampton Inn in Orlando near Disney World, that's probably up 50%.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
but yeah, like when I go look up any hotel that I'd love to stay in, it is probably up over 100%.
Yeah, like we rented a house in Venice, here in LA 3 years ago, and for a similar house now, we're paying literally double. Yeah.
Wow. And so what my inclination is that travel should slow. I think people are so pot committed for the summer that they're just sucking it up and they're going to burn through whatever they have to get this vacation done. I think there's like this kind of feeling of like, I didn't get to do anything for 2 years. I am going wherever.
Have you guys taken big trips?
As a family? No. We're probably never. I have 2 boys. It's where are we going? It's going to the restaurant is impossible. Yeah. You're talking about going on a plane?
Fair.
I will say though that the difference year over year is if you leave the country, you don't have to test to get back home. So we canceled a trip. I remember last summer, we thought vaccines were hot. We don't need to worry. Everything's going to be fine. And then by the end of the summer, COVID was raging again. And if you have kids, you can't get stuck 14 days.
Yeah.
Right? It's just not a feasible thing.
Yeah.
So this summer, that's not the case. You don't
Yeah.
have to test. You
Yeah.
just come right back home.
How many times have you guys had COVID?
That I've known him once.
So my entire house got it. I technically never tested positive, but I had it.
Got it.
January.
What about you?
I had the Omni.
1.5. I had one for sure, like one definite COVID, and then again, like 6 months later, my tongue just really hurt, and I was like, "Well, this has never happened before. It's probably COVID."
Dee
had COVID before COVID was a thing. Super Bowl, February, Miami.
You were early COVID.
I was like patient zero.
I think our whole house.
By the
had
way, I
COVID.
was in Paris with everyone from Fashion Week that got it. Then I was at the Super Bowl, which everyone got it.
Brian definitely had COVID in the house. So
Yeah.
you and Brian, we're 4 people are doing an Airbnb,
got it.
and
In
half the
Miami.
house was wiped out.
Yeah.
This is February of 2020.
That's how I got through it so nicely. But I don't know. I think people will get through the summer, and we talked about it briefly, but like there is clear indication that forward-looking travel is definitely slowing in terms of booking. So like Ben, when you guys think about like your family holiday plans, are you changing it because of inflation, or do you kind of, hey, I work at Flexport, I'm rich, it doesn't matter?
No, I think in our case, we are going to chill way out on the travel now because we've been cooped up for 2 years with COVID, not traveling much. This past few months, we traveled like crazy, and a little bit like you said last year when there was like that little lull. We kind of thought COVID was over. And yeah, now we're sort of like, all right, we've got it out of our system. We spent a bunch of money because it was so crazy expensive over the last year, and now we're planning on just taking it very easy. I do think business travel is about to come surging back, though. Like Flexport Inc. We're back in office in September, and companies like ours where you have 25, 30 global offices. All of a sudden, people have to be back in the office, but their teams are now way more distributed than they used to be. I think like the modern, call it senior director, VP, executive, that person's going to be on a lot of airplanes in the next couple of years.
And that's because they want to be, or like businesses are going to say, you need to be in person for this meeting.
I think it's this very specific thing happened where there was this diaspora of employees over the last 2.5 years. You have kind of a more dispersed workforce. They're being asked to come back to the office at least part of the time. So now if you're a manager of a company, at whatever stage of a company, chances are you have a team that's in multiple places, especially like every company now has a distributed engineering team. So if you're in any sort of technical leadership position, almost by definition, to go see your whole team, you're going to have to travel. I think it's like maybe that we're going to spend less time in a single office, but as people go back to the office, there's going to be a lot of time on the airplane.
So you guys are full back in your offices in September.
The Wyoming experiment's done.
I don't have any responsibilities at Flexport Inc. at all anymore.
Okay.
All I do for Flexport Inc. is a little bit of corp dev balance sheet investing, and then I do my own investing on the side. But no, I don't manage anybody internally at all.
Okay, so you can stay in Wyoming.
God, I didn't think to ask the question until now. No, we aren't doing full. We're not doing full 5 days a week. Every functional leader in the company got to choose something slightly different for their teams. Most teams have some version of 2 days a week fixed in the office and then one flex day.
So that means you have to live in the city.
Yeah, you have to live in a city with an office.
Yeah.
It's so like I had to go to Century City for a meeting on Friday, which for people who aren't from LA, outside of downtown, probably the most like corporate environment in the city. And it's a ghost town. There's no one there.
I think that'll change. Like he's saying September, like it's also like July 4th week. People were out. Like, I'm curious to see how it all plays out. But the business travel kind of prediction is interesting.
Please, I'm assuming for us that's going to be how it plays out. Maybe other companies are different.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
it's such a cost
because
center.
right now it's just leisure travel, right? That's leading the charge.
Yeah. For
so,
sure.
Yeah. I'm curious. People. Yeah. Like, does a McKinsey consultant need to be gone Monday through Thursday like they used to be?
I think this is the question that every McKinsey consultant is asking themselves. But my hunch is everything is going to go back to being exactly like it was before.
Really?
Yeah.
No change.
No changes.
Wow. And do you think the hybrid work will eventually die too?
A lot of the best companies I've invested in even the ones that were built during the pandemic are in person.
Yeah, IRL's big in investing.
Yeah.
I only invest in companies that work in person. I've
Really?
heard that. No, not me. I'm saying I've heard people say that.
So I don't have that rule. I think in particular, like companies that are highly technical, that are like a pure product-led growth strategy, maybe those can work better. Like Zapier, for instance, that was fully remote for the last decade. I think they're crushing it. But for the most part, especially businesses that are more operational, I just can't imagine trying to get the product market fit sitting in your apartment.
I know Founders Fund, which is obviously a famous fund. They're one of their criteria. If you don't work in person, we don't invest.
Yeah, I believe that.
I like it.
And crypto,
they're our biggest shareholder, by the way. Maybe at least top 3.
Oh, really?
Wow.
Yeah. And crypto was largely known as distributed teams, and we've seen how that's gone.
Yeah. If you don't see someone at the water cooler,
Yeah,
I don't know. I like in person.
How are you? You guys are fully in person.
You're fully in person.
we never stopped
Yeah.
during COVID. We came in.
Yeah.
You were breaking the law.
No, we were essential. We're
essential.
We were the
number one
one.
podcast in the world. We had to show up every day.
2 things. We were doing this, which allowed us to be here. 2, we were the top selling mask on Amazon.
Whoa, that's what kind of masks?
Cloth.
Smart.
Made in USA.
Smart.
America first.
Yeah, and we avoided COVID during that time too, while we were in here.
Yeah.
That's because D already had it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to use the super spreader.
All right. Well, we're going to jump into, a full-on interrogation of Ben about the world's supply chain. We talk tariffs. We talk about investing. It's an incredibly informative interview. You use a lot of words that I would never use. So where'd you go to college?
I dropped out of Vassar College.
Okay.
I went for one glorious semester.
Okay.
I took 4 classes. I got B's.
And then where'd you learn this vocabulary? You have a lot of big words you use.
I'm sorry. I actually think it's not a mark of intelligence at all to use big words. And in fact, the opposite.
You use
So.
a lot of words that I've never used.
Well, then I'm overcompensating for something.
All right, let's get into the interview. All right, everyone, we have a special guest today. I'm trying to remember how we met originally, but I think it was in our office like 10 years ago.
Yeah, I was trying to sell you things.
Okay, so Ben Braverman is here from Flexport, and I think you guys had just started.
Yep.
And we at 5-4 at the time, obviously, were still importing goods, and you guys were... What was the exact first pitch for Flexport?
The very first pitch for Flexport, I'm ashamed to say, was as simplistic as your current vendor is probably terrible.
Yeah.
We're not promising that we're not terrible, but we're promising that we're going to try really hard. And we've gotten a couple $1 million from folks who don't normally invest in software companies. And I think we leaned into the fact that it was like, it just super interesting that why did Google and Bloomberg invest in a freight forwarder? And our customer was like very skeptical of what we were doing. Our competitors were 100 years old. So you couldn't come in and say, look, we're better on day one. But what you could do is come in like really earnestly. And like, I think that was a big part of the brand that we figured out, which is like earnestness and trying hard. Very 4th of July values. Really, we basically would just show them, be like, look, chances are your incumbent's terrible. And like occasionally the customer would be super generous with us and tell us, like we had one client tell us that their incumbent had racked up like $500,000 into merge charges, not picking things up on time. Didn't tell them for 8 months, and they just sent them a giant $500,000 invoice at the end of the year.
Wow.
And we were like, look, we can't promise we're going to be the best in the world, but we swear to you, like, we won't do that. Like, we will give you a dedicated account manager. That account manager is really going to know your business. Oftentimes, they're going to be someone who's had like a wide array of experiences in life, logistics and beyond. And then like the when the pitch really sort of crystallized was when we built enough of the platform that we figured out, and like there's another company that we can talk about on this later that like figured out something similar in a different market. We figured out that our customer desperately needed software, and like you were our customer at that point in history.
Yeah.
Like folks like you who are importing goods, who had real supply chains that were spending hundreds of thousands, or in your case millions of dollars a year on transportation. Like you didn't have any way to go buy software to manage it, and you really would never have real budget to do that, because that'd be crazy to allocate more budget to a cost center. We just could give you the platform though. Like, what if we just gave you the software for free and then said, oh, by the way, like the only way your data gets inside of this software is if you ship with us.
Yeah.
So that was really when the pitch sort of took off.
And then what was like the turning moment from investors and from customers that like where it really just, I guess they wanted the software because they wanted the data, right? And so if you got the data, then
yeah, I mean, but ultimately the reason the early folks all bought from us, like, and so many of them were like, so you use your mental time machine, go back to 2014, 2015, 2016. D2C was new.
Yeah.
Like what you guys were doing at 5.4 was new.
Yeah.
Like people, like subscription boxes were new. Venture was flowing into both hardware and D2C and subscription box. Like all three of these categories were blowing up with venture capital. And we really rode that wave. Like we rode this wave of most of the founders weren't like you, and they didn't have people on their team that really knew supply chain, and they badly needed like an easy button. It was just like, oh my gosh.
it was like Stripe,
Shopify, kind of, right?
Totally. Dude, it was hard. By the same token, like why you need Shopify, it's hard enough making a good product and finding people who want to buy it. You can't also figure out how to build your own shopping cart. By the same token, like you can't figure out logistics on your own. Flexport was just sort of like this easy button for those companies. And then over time, the platform became more real and we added all kinds of new products. But for the first 2 years, no one cared about the software at all. The software was a bonus. It was just like, we can outsource this problem to you, and we have one person that we email. Okay, this is like amazing.
Yeah. And so what is Flexport today? Because like today it feels like it's gone far beyond that.
Flexport today is, Ryan has said this publicly, so I'm not saying anything that's not in public. Targeting $5 billion in sales this year. I don't know what that is in merchandise value, but it's got to be like $30 or $40 billion in like wholesale value of stuff that we will move for our customers. When you visualize our business, you can picture like without a Flexport or without other freight forwarders, and there's plenty of other companies that do similar things to what we do. We just happen to do it with this software backbone underpinning all of it. What we do is we basically stitch together 15 or 20 totally disparate things. Like having a trucker show up to a factory in China is a totally different transaction than filing documents with the government in China, which is a totally different transaction than making sure you have space on a vessel leaving China. So like if you're a client and your target, okay, you're sophisticated enough, theoretically you can unbundle and you can do each of those transactions yourself. The most companies, like you don't have hundreds of people to manage this stuff. You want someone like Flexport just to own it end to end.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. And so today, like, so is it feeling like the picks and shovels of like the supply chain industry? Is that how you would word it? Like,
yeah, as far as like what Flexport does.
Yeah.
So Flexport today, you can think of it as a bunch of different businesses under one roof, all unified around the idea that we're going to solve, still to this day, we want to be the single source of truth for our customer and be the single point of contact to solve this really wide set of problems.
Yeah.
And that the whole hook, like, and the really, I think our, like, Rick Zolo, a buddy at Equal Ventures, who's a good friend of yours, calls this our wedge.
Yeah.
Our wedge was that we were going to give away this platform. Like you cannot buy, just the same way like our friend Michael Collin at Movement is giving away a TMS to truck brokers. You cannot buy a piece of software that's better than what Flexport has built for managing, especially like an import-based supply chain, managing where your goods are, what it's costing you to land them, like all these things that if you run a business from an operational perspective, you need to know. You can't buy anything better. And we just made it free. Like we just ruined this market for anyone else who wants to go monetize it with software. And I think the dirty secret is the market never really existed. Like even if you have $1 billion budget on transportation, your budget for software is going to be couple $100,000 a year or something.
Yeah.
You really, and to solve the problem of $1 billion supply chains transportation management, you just can't do it for $100K a year in software spend. So Ryan, our founder, figured out this amazing hack, which was, let's just give away the platform. And the next hack was, in a world where you were selling the platform and the service separately, you'd have to do some kind of integration where like you'd pay some expensive consultancy to come in and go, all right, how do we get the data from one platform into the other? Because we're both like the service provider and the software provider under one roof, it just works on day one. And so from a customer perspective, it felt like this incredible amount of value. And then our salespeople just got to go, oh, and by the way, like you just pay us whatever you're paying UPS, Expeditors, Kuehne+Nagel. These are all like legacy freight forwarders for those of you who don't know freight.
Yeah.
You just pay them, you pay us exactly what you're paying them, in some cases even a little bit less, and we'll just give you this platform and this team that's going to serve you for free. And that wedge allowed us to, one, like earn a lot of goodwill with customers and build this business that's now, we're global. We moved goods between like 90 countries last year. When COVID first hit, and there was no PPE on the West Coast, Ryan worked with Kaiser Permanente and UCSF and got all the doctors PPE in the first like 4 weeks of the crisis. Like this incredibly powerful platform that really started with like us going to D2C brands and going, look, we promise we're not going to screw this up.
Yeah.
No, I think it's
amazing.
super impressive. Ryan Peterson, who's the founder, right? And he's done an incredible job of kind of just being this spokesperson for freight. And like it's this industry that's not super sexy, but he's done so many podcasts and interviews where I'm like, holy shit, like this is like very fascinating space, and I don't think people appreciate it. And
how complex and how hard it is.
We've imported goods for 20 years, so we get it, but
Totally.
like why would someone else get it?
And I think they only started caring last year when they couldn't get their shit. Like you go to the grocery store, and now
Was he like on boats, like in the Long Beach port? Like Superman.
Yes. Ryan got this advice of one of our investors. Is this guy? Have you met Roy Bahat from Bloomberg?
No.
I haven't. No.
So Roy was the CEO of IGN, the gaming magazine. Super interesting guy. Very politically active. He gave us his advice early on. He said, look, no one gives a shit about you. Like, no one gives a shit about your company. Like, no one cares about your story. And he wasn't trying to be mean. He was like, look, the press, the readership, no one actually cares about you. They care about like what Mark Andreessen has now coined the current thing.
Yeah.
Like all anybody cares about is the current thing. If you try to get them to focus on something else, they're going to ignore you. All you can do is attach yourself to the current thing.
Yeah.
And you could figure out how to ride the wave. And you can't always, like your business isn't always going to be pertinent to the current thing, but often enough, something will be going on in the zeitgeist and the media hype cycle that pertains to your business. And if you can figure out how to attach yourself to it authentically, and even better, like if you can provide some value to the world, authentic connection to the current thing, plus providing value to the universe, that seems to be the formula to just like have constant attention, constant positive feedback loops. Big thanks to Roy for teaching us that.
And do you think that had a material impact on the business? I know it raised the profile because like now like Flexport's like a household name as far as a company's concerned. Because like one of the questions we always get asked is like, as so many founders listen to the podcast, they struggle with, do I need to be putting out content as an individual, or should I just run my business? And like, I mean, you guys did attract a very heavy hitter as, I guess, co-CEO now, which is Dave Clark from Amazon. And I'm sure he was paying attention during COVID. Because like, I remember listening or following Ryan Peterson on Twitter during all the supply chain, specifically LA port issues. And he was my go-to source of information for like truth, because I didn't believe, as someone that knows how politically wild this stuff gets, I just couldn't listen to a politician talk about this topic. I was like, I need it from an objective source, and Ryan became that objective source for me.
Yeah. Is the question like, is it important?
Yeah.
I think it's unique because I've never met Ryan, but he just seems special. right?
Yeah,
Like,
he definitely. You could definitely invest in Flexport just on the thesis that Ryan's a special human.
and so if you're not a special founder, I don't know if content's your game. Is what my point is.
Yeah, I do think that not every founder is meant to be in the spotlight the same way Ryan is.
Yeah.
Like this guy, he literally toured 60 minutes around the port of LA Long Beach in a helicopter.
Yeah.
With like the headset on,
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
the cool guy sunglasses on.
Yeah.
We're not all meant for that. Not all of us are going to rise to that occasion.
Yeah.
However, I do think it's sort of like a simple mental model of like, where should the content come from? We've basically found that our customer doesn't care at all what Flexport Inc. has to say. They really care what Ryan has to say.
Mhm.
And I think it kind of goes back to what Dee just said of like, the more you know about our industry, the less you maybe trust some of the data or some of the stories that you hear, or really any of the reality of how certain parts of the industry operate whatsoever. And so if you're going to hear a story, you want it to be from a true expert that you trust, not from a corporate mouthpiece. So like if you look at Ryan's Twitter account versus like the Flexport Inc. Twitter, there's no comparison in engagement, content, followers, any of it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't follow Flexport. I don't follow Ryan.
No one does.
I only follow Ryan. Yeah.
No, Ryan is the physical embodiment. He's the personification of Flexport. Yeah.
Why did he, by the way, when the announcement came that you guys are hiring Dave Clark, I didn't Google. I went straight to Ryan's account. I was like, I want to hear it from the horse's mouth. Like, okay, you made this big hire,
and you knew there'd be an essay waiting for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think, he's obviously built that trust with his audience where like people feel comfortable kind of going to him. I think to take it back for a second. So as a manufacturer for the last 20 years, we've dealt with many issues when it came to supply chain, logistics, container issues, shutdowns, monsoons, earthquakes, all these types of things. What happened last year to me was completely avoidable. And I don't know, like, are you as Flexport Inc., and maybe you don't feel comfortable answering this, is the Secretary of Commerce talking to you guys and being like, hey, what are you guys seeing on the ground there? Because everything looks great up here.
Yeah.
Is it Buttigieg?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I don't know exactly with whom Ryan has been engaging, but he engaged a lot with both administrations, with the Trump administration during the first wave of COVID, with the Biden administration on trying to relieve some of the pork crisis. To your point, like I do think some of it was theoretically avoidable. One example, though, of something that like I don't know how you get around is over the last 10 years, so all the ocean carriers used to own their own what are called chassis, where like chassis are the thing that when a container gets loaded off the boat, it gets loaded onto a chassis and then a truck pulls the chassis. So a chassis is basically like a piece of metal and wood with wheels on it that a container gets loaded onto. It used to be that the ocean carriers had their own pool of those chassis so that you always knew if a boat was going to show up with 10,000 or 5,000 containers, you always knew, okay, that same shipping line was responsible for making sure there was the same number of chassis sitting there waiting. Otherwise, you literally can't unload the vessel the way you need to. What happened over the last 10 years is the shipping lines all went, God, we're spending literally billions of dollars a year on this asset. We don't always have them in the right place. Shouldn't we just all share with each other? Like, wouldn't that actually alleviate some of the pressure on the supply chain? And in that case, like, shouldn't we just let one third-party company kind of own this market, and then we'll just all share? Like, we'll all just share a pool of chassis, and this one third-party company will make sure that there's enough because they're making money on every transaction. Why wouldn't they always make sure there was enough chassis? Because by definition, we're going to make sure they're profitable. Well, what happens in a year where imports spike by literally 50%? This one company, and literally it's one company that has a monopoly on chassis in America. This one company was faced with an impossible decision, which is, do you make way more chassis than ever? Like, do you effectively spend hundreds of millions, billions of dollars in cash today to get chassis in 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, whenever they're ready, under the hope the economy is still this hot? Or do you do nothing and you reap record profits? you assume that by the time you made all those chassis, the economy is going to have cooled off anyway, and you're not actually going to have, there's not actually going to be the need for them anymore, and you're going to be stuck holding the bag with literally $1 billion of excess capacity of chassis with no demand for them. So you're in this terrible predicament where the US economy is basically held hostage, and that company can't rationally solve the problem. Like if they solve the problem, they will lose billions of dollars, maybe go bankrupt. So what do you do?
I get that. My point is in 2008, the government intervened with banks because they knew that was best for the fucking country.
Yeah.
And in this case, if you're talking $1 billion, $2 billion, I mean, we pissed away trillions. If that's my point, is that government intervention in this case, because, you know, part of the inflation problem today is a function of exorbitant freight cost.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's an area that the government could have stepped in to help. And that's why, like, when I mean avoidable, like that problem, that company, for them to solve independently, I get it. It's too much of a risk. But like, could there have been a subsidy by the US government and maybe like a profit share on it?
Of course.
Hey, you know, just why can't we think outside the box and solve these problems?
The problem with the way the government thinks about these things is in 2008, the financial crisis was systemic. Like the banks actually almost ran out of money. So they initiated TARP and the government made money on TARP.
Yeah.
And the government could have done something similar during COVID and made
JVs
money
with everybody, yeah.
Right. They could have made money on freight.
Yeah.
And loan the money, expedite freight, because now the bag is like now the companies who now have too much inventory.
Yeah.
Right? Like I'm sure you see it like from Flexport, like everyone overordered, everything was delayed, and every company's fucked.
Yeah, I think maybe fucked is strong, but in general,
But don't you see excess inventory across the board?
We're seeing certainly order velocities have slowed way down, right?
Mhm.
It's in 2021, companies could not order more inventory fast enough. They could not pay companies like ours enough money to get it here any faster. And the dynamic has definitely shifted. I do think that specific example of the chassis shortage is one where the government theoretically could have gotten involved. I think most of the other places where you go, oh gosh, the government getting involved here is maybe opening a can of worms that's a little bit scary. In that one specific instance where it's like, look, we just need to make more chassis.
Yeah.
We need to make them one time.
Yeah.
And we need to accept that maybe we're going to have extra chassis for 2 years.
Yeah.
And someone should have taken it on the chin. The government is the perfect person to step in and take it on the chin, right? In that situation. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's frustrating because when the problem is as severe as it can be, you can figure it out. Like the vaccine was figured out January of 2020 before it even hit the United States.
Yeah.
And TARP, like we figured it out. We saved the financial system. So like
would you have allowed the government, because like theoretically we could have been on an opt-in basis giving the vaccine, to your point, basically
Right.
from the moment COVID started. Like,
right.
Would you have been in favor of the government basically saying, look, if you want to opt in, you can take this experimental vaccine in advance of FDA trials?
Of course.
Yeah.
Because didn't we all get the vaccine before FDA technically approved it?
I think it was a provisional approval or
Right,
something. Yeah. But they like, we got it after like a year.
A year of data they had,
Yeah.
whatever testing they were doing. There was some, you know, but to be fair, that's a vaccine. This is this is like
Yeah.
going
No,
in your
my
body.
point is
Yeah.
problems are solvable.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like we have this global catastrophe and they figured out the vaccine in like 48 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that freaked me out the most in the last couple of years is some of the things that I expected to be super solvable are way more complicated than I ever imagined. Like this, have you guys heard of melt blown plastic?
No.
So melt blown plastic is like a very specific manufacturing process that outputs the kind of plastic that's used in PPE and masks. And it turns out it is like alchemy. Like we just do not know how to make it in America at all. And there's like one factory in Connecticut or something that has the right machinery and expertise and team in place where they were kind of working around the clock to make PPE. But effectively, like in the beginning stages of COVID, there was no amount of will or money that we could have spent or applied in America to solve the PPE crisis. Like we were just kind of stumped.
Yeah.
We didn't have the equipment. We didn't have the people. We didn't have the knowledge. And realizing that like, oh, that's the same thing for microchips. Like Taiwan is this magical island that has like figured out alchemy and without them, we don't have chips anymore.
Right.
It's like there's all that. Like that's kind of been the scariest thing for me is like realizing all these single points of failure.
Yeah, and I think when you think about like,
And how fragile the whole world kind of is,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, certainly.
yeah, I mean,
That's
I
the
was
scary
reading an
part.
article how basically a prolonged Russia-Ukraine war puts a stranglehold on wheat that can basically starve Europe.
Yeah, there's like a 12% calorie deficit in the world. So there's
Yeah.
going to be famine in Yemen,
Yeah.
famine in a lot of the northern African countries.
Mainly Northern Africa, I think, gets hit the hardest. But like, it's crazy. Like, and despite like what we've went through in COVID, I still don't. People talk about like diversifying supply chain, diversifying manufacturing sources. Are you seeing people actually do that, or it's like, China's great, let's just keep going to them?
So I mean, Vietnam's the big winner. And even as Vietnam wins, China wins too. This is sort of the thing that I think the press has missed the most in this story. We saw enormous diversification to Vietnam, particularly in textiles and a few other industries over the last, call it 3 years since the Trump tariffs. The part of the story the media missed, though, is almost all of this productive capacity is owned by the same folks that own the productive capacity in China. So even as like the label now says "Made in Vietnam," you're still the winnings are still accruing to the same companies and the same owners in mainland China. Which is like, I'm not at all like saying that's good or bad. I'm just like, that is the reality of what's happening. Like, you still have immense power accruing and effectively in the Chinese manufacturing sector, even if now some of it is being technically made in Vietnam.
Yeah.
It's still, China is still like the source of the expertise. It's still where you have the kind that, use the melt blown plastic example. Even if we had the equipment in the US, we wouldn't have had the operators. We wouldn't have had the know-how, anyone in the entire country to know how to operate the equipment and produce the products. So I think diversification is much more challenging than anyone believes it's going to be. Everyone thinks for the last 20, basically since NAFTA, we all thought LATAM was going to explode as a manufacturing center. Mexico was going to explode as a transshipment point. And to some degrees they have, but I think not to the scale anybody would have expected. We're still just very much a trans-Pacific production, consumption, dynamic economy.
Wow.
So peak COVID, were governments actually talking? Like, obviously China and US are the most important countries in the world from an economic perspective. Were they actually talking like, hey, we're government officials, or Ryan was just sailing around the world trying to figure it out himself?
Both. I think one of the scariest calls that we ever heard about was in the early days of early days of COVID and the PPE crisis, sort of the waning days of the Trump administration. There were some calls where you realize like a lot of folks who have worked in government for their whole careers, they really don't know how the traditional economy operates. Of
course.
I'm not saying this to be pejorative. Like they've never run a business. They've never imported goods.
Yeah.
They've never dealt with a Chinese government that was concerned about exporting during the height of this crisis, faulty PPE, and had therefore stopped all production. And so no one really knew what to do. They didn't know how to deal with these problems they were encountering. And I think they leaned really heavily on the private sector. Like I'm not just saying just Ryan, but there was a lot of Ryans that stepped up during first PPE crisis and then the supply chain crisis to help the government figure out what the heck to do. Another great example, like during the supply chain crisis, when Ryan just worked with the Port of Long Beach and the federal government to say, look, we're going to temporarily allow people to stack containers higher than too high.
Yeah.
Like super simple, like very much a lead bullet, not a silver bullet, very boring, but like it actually made more space for containers that month. Yeah.
And kind of segueing into like the actual really about inflation, when you guys look at freight cost, specifically ocean freight, I think last fall, winter, we were at $22,000 for a container. Pre-COVID, that was like $2,500.
Yep.
I looked 2 weeks ago, it looks like it's $8,000.
Yep.
Is it continuing to come down, or did they figure out a new high norm and they're never coming back down?
So it's interesting when multiple things happen in parallel, how hard it is to unbundle reality. So like, I don't claim at all to be the perfect unbundler of this reality, but here's my assessment of what happened. In parallel to COVID and the enormous surge of imports, as we all sat on our couches and heroically bought things on Amazon and Etsy.
Thank you for your service.
Yeah, you're very welcome. In parallel to that,
Fake biking on the Peloton.
we also had the carriers really consolidate their ability to not set rates, because they can't set the rates, but there used to be a lot more ocean carriers. And over the last generation, like call it 10, 15 years, a few carriers went bankrupt, a few carriers were acquired. And now there's really three main alliances in the ocean market. And they had the same concern in this environment that that chassis manufacturer that I was talking about did, which is if they overbuild their capacity too much. Basically, if they rise to the occasion and say, look, we're all going to build bigger ships, we're going to build more containers, we're going to add more capacity to the global supply chain. The moment demand drops in the US, which frankly I think is incoming as we enter maybe a more recessionary environment, they're going to be left holding the bag with too many ships, too many containers, too many employees. And so in these asset heavy industries, it's really, really tough to adjust. And I just think if we're in this dynamic now where even if we're permanently slightly elevated on consumption in the US because people have shifted some of their spending from activities to stuff, even if that's just 5 or 10% more stuff being imported, it's going to equal really high freight rates, because these guys, they can't rationally build their fleets any bigger or they're going to lose a ton of money in the future. Got it.
So you think freight rates, ocean, probably sits around where it's at for a while?
I think through the rest of this year, yeah. And it really all depends on how extreme. If we experience a real recession in the US, where like right now we're in this weird recession where there's still tons of jobs and jobs are paying more than ever.
Yeah.
And so I think you're still seeing a lot of consumer transactions happening. If we get into a real recession where consumer activity drops, then maybe you start to see the freight rates come down. But I don't think you're going to see an enormous amount of new capacity coming online, just because it would be foolish for the carriers to do it, knowing the carriers over the last 10 years before COVID, they lost billions and billions of dollars each year after year after year. They're not going to overbuild again, I don't think.
Got it. And I read yesterday that Biden administration is finally looking into the Trump tariffs, potentially removing them. It clearly will have an impact in terms of pricing. Do you think that's meaningful, or it's just more press talk?
Yeah, I think the Trump tariffs primarily impact things that are not the drivers of inflation. If you look at what's driving inflation in America, it's basically fuel, housing, food, and healthcare. So those four things. None of those four things are really impacted by these tariffs.
Yeah.
The worst thing about the Trump tariffs was just the way they were rolled out, where it was literally
no one even knew.
And there were folks like you who were running big businesses that overnight had SKUs go from being wildly profitable to unprofitable by a tweet. It wasn't even like an official change of the tariff code. There was just hey, these tariffs are changing tomorrow.
Yeah.
Hope your business can adjust. So that was suboptimal. But no, I don't think that whether the tariffs stay or not, I don't think it will have any impact on the inflation that the majority of Americans currently feel.
Got it. Another question I have, since I have you here. One of the interesting business models that I saw happen about 6-7 years ago, which got me really concerned for American businesses, was that companies that manufacture a product in China can ship directly to Americans as long as it's under $800. They get charged no duty.
Yep.
How the fuck is that allowed?
It's so crazy. And for those of you who aren't aware, it's called Section 321. Sometimes people in the industry refer to it as de minimis. There's all sorts of ways that people couch this strategy. But effectively, if you as a brand, or whether it's a Chinese company, Vietnamese company, any foreign entity, or even a domestic entity, if you're shipping goods as parcels directly from the country of manufacture to the customer here in the US. So it can't go to a warehouse first and then get sold. It has to be the customer buys it, and then the goods are sold or sent to that customer as a parcel directly. You don't pay any duty up to $800, as Dee said. We thought this was going to go away years and years ago.
And by the way, $100 billion Shein company was built off the backs of that,
and destroyed American companies.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not the right person to wax poetic on either the morality or the economic efficiency of this strategy, but it does seem strange. And like we even have clients who are, you know, very smartly, I think, gaming the system to some degree, and then they'll actually set up their fulfillment centers.
Yeah, everyone's doing it in Mexico.
I mean,
now.
it's comical that the government doesn't understand this. Like, TikTok is destroying Facebook, Snapchat, Pinterest, you name it. Shein's destroying American retail.
Yeah.
Look,
Like, no one cares.
No one cares.
That's maybe an extreme take. I have no opinion in one way or another on that particular company. But
sounds like she's a Flexport client.
I've been screaming from the mountaintop for 3 years that it's absolutely ridiculous that TikTok's allowed in the US. Yeah. I've literally been screaming this 3 years on this podcast. We can go back.
But yeah, I mean, on the Section 321, like, there's so many Mexico entities now that basically you import the goods into Mexico. I think it's in a bonded warehouse or whatever it is.
Exactly.
And ships directly to American consumers, and you skip the duties.
Yeah, and effectively, to expand on what Dee just said, a bonded warehouse, you're effectively saying you haven't actually cleared customs for the country where the warehouse is sitting.
Yeah.
So you're effectively saying, hey, this warehouse is it's like no man's land. Even though it's within Mexico, we haven't actually imported this stuff into Mexico. Yeah. It's just sort of sitting in no man's land. And then the moment we want to sell to the US, it leaves this warehouse via parcel, goes directly to the customer. We pay a little bit more in shipping because obviously it's more expensive to ship something from Mexico or Canada to a customer in the US than it would be to do it from the US. But we save a ton on duty and potentially on labor within the fulfillment center. So there's really all sorts of things that people are doing right now to sort of, I think, you know, rationally game the system, because, you know, if your competitors are all doing it, you're sort of forced to do it, that are maybe not the most beneficial for the U.S. labor force.
You're very articulate.
Yeah,
Flexport really has
you guys have
speaking
good
skills
PR
over
training,
there.
huh?
You guys are fucking media trained.
You basically give the hot take without saying the hot take.
Listen, guys, it's good.
It's a big business.
Switching gears a little, I know you're a very active investor, angel investor, and obviously, like, the climate's drastically changed in the last kind of, call it 90 days, really. What do you see out there? What's the temperature? Are you still aggressively investing? Do you think it's an opportunity? Is it time to sit tight? Like, I'd love to hear your take on it.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I think 2021 we will all remember as the most frenetic, wild investing climate, certainly of any of our adult lives. Like maybe like my nephew's here in this room, he was in his early 20s, and maybe when he gets older and starts investing, he will see a similarly wild climate. I have never seen anything like 2021, where even top tier funds were doing really minimal diligence, not because they were incompetent, but because the timelines were just so compressed, and where great founders just had so much leverage. Like, and to a degree that I don't know that it was super healthy for the ecosystem, where I don't know that deals need to close in 2 weeks. Like, I think it's healthy to have 6-8 weeks due diligence, talk to customers, make sure we all understand what a business does and is before we wire money. But 2021 was not that. If you were in the game in 2021, you were moving with lightning speed. And I really respect some of the folks who were slower in 2021, who, one of my good friends was just lucky. He left a fund and was starting a new one and sort of missed it. And he says all the time, like, the highlight of my career is just being on the bench for this craziness. So what you're seeing now is really total hibernation of growth stage. So growth stage being anything Series B or later, no one is raising money. And if deals are happening, they are either distressed deals or they're extensions of rounds where a founder is realizing, hey, I had pretty good terms on my Series A. Let me go bring in a few more bucks on the same terms. You are not really seeing anyone raising up rounds, Series B or later right now. And I'm sure someone will write in with some exception, but basically that part of the market is frozen. Seed is super interesting in that I don't think, and I'm just echoing what a lot of other smart people have said here, you're not seeing the price correction at seed that you would have expected, where you're still seeing and this is not every company, but you're still seeing a lot of companies, particularly coming out of like the top incubators, that are raising at 15 or 20 valuation without a ton of traction. But you're also seeing folks that have 500K in ARR that are raising at 12. So like at seed, I think disciplined investors are finding good opportunities. The most exciting stage is Series A. I was having a conversation with a few friends about this recently, where we were talking about like why Series A seemingly is so hot and special right now. And it's because Series A is the one time as a founder you don't get to pick. Like if you're fundraising your Series A, it means you have fallen ass backwards into product market fit. You have the tiger by the tail, and now you just don't want to screw it up. Where you're like, oh my God, it's working.
Yeah.
We something that we spent 2 years building a product.
Yeah.
Customers want to buy it. We want to scale the team. We want to scale the Eng team. We want to put some cash in the bank. We have to raise a Series A. And so you actually have rational tier 1 founders that are going out to raise Series A's right now. And I think the dynamic is pretty founder friendly still, in that you're not, it's not like you're raising at 2014 valuations. Like the valuations are still healthy, but they're, much more reasonable than they would have been last year. And I think you're finding great VCs and great companies are meeting at Series A, and they're doing reasonable deals where both sides are pretty happy. And that's like in the 4 deals that I'm sort of in the process of finalizing right now, they're all Series A.
Got it. What advice, I'm sure we have a lot of listeners, let's say you work at a late stage growth tech company and your company just got marked down 75. Here's the answer.
I don't know. Tick the top in 2021, retire.
But like, let's say your company just got like marked down 75%. What would you, if let's say that was you, what would you do? And you're like 28 years old and, you're at the early stage of your career.
This is where you got to do the in the cruel light of day, what is the reality of the business that you work for? I think there's actually a lot of companies right now that have been overly marked down. Like if you talk to some of the secondary buyers, which just gives you a sense of how sophisticated secondary is probably the least sophisticated part of the venture market.
Yeah.
And for reasons
so just to explain secondary for people who don't know.
Yeah.
So secondary is are investors who are buying shares either from founders themselves, from employees, or from existing investors. They generally are not doing it as part of a formal fundraising round. They're not doing formal diligence. It's sort of more ad hoc cowboy investing or cowgirl investing, whatever nomenclature you prefer, where they're basically going to these typically early employees and negotiating one-off deals to buy their stock. The secondary market right now is really operating on the principle of everything. If anyone's buying in the secondary market, they want maximum discount to the preferred, which I think is the wrong way to go shopping in this market. Because what you're actually doing when you say we will only invest in companies that have been marked down at X percentage versus the preferred, and preferred for those of you who aren't in this industry, preferred refers to the price during the last institutional round of funding. So whatever price of the company that typically a venture capitalist or a private equity firm, whatever price they wrote in their round, where they cut a big check and they did diligence, whatever price they paid, that's the preferred price. In general, if you're finding companies today that have been marked down drastically from their preferred, it either can mean that they're heavily impaired, like there's something really wrong, they were really overvalued, or it could just mean they're in a bucket with a bunch of other companies that had real problems. And I think a lot of secondary buyers right now are having a hard time suss out the difference between the two. And so if I were an employee at one of these companies, I would be trying like hell to figure out which boat I was in. Am I in a company that has a real business that actually, with a few tweaks could be really profitable, and has the right number of employees relative to our mission? And some of these things can be hard to find out. And I actually think if you're at a good company, they shouldn't be that hard to find out. You'll kind of get a sense of how much revenue there is, if you're growing, all these things. But if you're in a company that was being valued on hopes and dreams last year, and you just feel like, oh, we're at $2 million a year in sales, and my stock was issued at an $800 million valuation, you got to have a really hard conversation either with your boss or with some outsider you really respect, and try to figure out how plausible is it that you're ever going to see upside on the stock. And If the answer is no, that doesn't mean quit right away. Like there are reasons to work somewhere
And just collect a paycheck.
Yeah, collect a paycheck and learn and build your career, whatever.
No one wants to learn. Get out of here.
We're trying to get rich here, Ben.
If you're trying to get rich though, and you're upside down on the options,
Go to Exxon.
Yeah,
Go to Chevron.
yeah. I think, and I do think like that's going to be the best thing for founders of companies. And I keep wanting to talk about Dee's company that I'm not allowed to talk about. The best thing for founders of companies right now who are raising money and are building their brands today, these employees are super poachable. Like the top 1% employee at a unicorn startup who thought their options were worth X and they're actually worth 1/10 of X. For better or for worse, that person is way more available than they were 12 months ago. And I just think the best founders are going to seize this moment and go get those folks.
Okay, I have my last question. You have $100 million to deploy. You can deploy it in one late stage non-public company that's not Flexport. What would you invest in?
And not Stripe. Because that's the obvious one that everyone will say.
Gosh, this is not a question that I've given an enormous amount of thought to.
Just, gunslinging. You're a secondary guy. You're not doing too much diligence. You're just slinging.
If I could get in at the right price, Anduril.
I don't even know what that is.
So you know what it is.
So Anduril is Trey Stevens, who's on the board of Flexport, and Palmer Luckey's company that is defense tech. So basically, they're a big government contractor. They sell all sorts of drone technology, anti-drone technology.
So you're long war.
I am long institutional rot, where I basically believe over the last 100 years, sadly in America, we have a lot of great companies that are now run by bureaucrats. They went from being founder led to maybe being progeny led to now just being led by some bureaucrat with an MBA who doesn't really care about, if the company is living up to its platonic ideal or if it's just like some okay company.
Like what? Give an example of that.
I think like the companies that Anduril competes with, like Legacy Defense,
like Raytheon.
Yeah, like these companies that are invoicing the government hundreds of millions, billions of dollars for products that never see the light of day, never function as promised, have Windows 95 like interfaces. Like I don't know enough to say which one of those companies is the worst offenders, but like as a category, our government, when you look at what our defense spending is as a nation and what we get for it, we should have the dopest shit imaginable.
No, I mean it's like it was loosely based on reality, but War Dogs, the movie.
Yeah.
With Jonah Hill and Miles Teller, like that was insanity. That's how government contracts for defense are being done.
And this is so you're hitting on, I think, why Anduril has been so successful. So Palmer is the tech genius. So Palmer Luckey, for those who aren't aware, he created the Oculus. Facebook bought it for $2 billion. The left came for him. He was forced out of Facebook, and then he founded Anduril. If he had founded Anduril alone, I don't know the business could have succeeded because of the way government procurement works.
Right.
It's just so complicated. And like I don't begin to understand how you sell into the DoD, but Trey Stevens knows as well as anybody on earth how the government wants to buy, likes to buy, needs to buy. And he sort of has brought these two worlds together where Palmer is able to build the actual best tech the government could possibly buy to protect our citizens. And then Trey knows how to get the government to pay for it in a way that, they're comfortable with. A really unique meeting of two humans who, like, separately, I don't think either of them would have had Anduril, but together it's like, oh my God, this really works.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's great.
Great. I love it. Blow shit up.
am I the first person? Yeah. And by the way, they aren't making missiles. They're mostly like actual defense tech, like protecting embassies, etc.
I didn't even mean it in the sense of explosion. I meant more in the sense of like businesses need to evolve and change. If they're not, they got to be blown up. Like we accept so much. Like one of the problems I have with like specifically older Americans is they're hung up on how everything was done in 1776. And the reality is things need to evolve. Thinking needs to evolve. People need to evolve. And businesses need to evolve as well. Like just because this was such a great business 50 years ago, it doesn't mean you're just God-given going to be the best business today. And I think Americans in general have a very tough time with change. And I get it. Fast change is scary. All change is scary. But I think specifically in the business world, it's capitalism. If something's better and more efficient, it should win.
I think people have a hard time picturing what you're describing. What Dee wants to tear down, and I think like if you've worked inside of a big company, you see it. The prizes have become so big just for surviving as a leader inside of a big legacy company where, you can make millions of dollars a year being, some corporate vice president at some forgotten
VP,
company.
Yeah.
And it's like, if that is the structure of the economy, your incentive is not to build anything new. Your incentive is not to take any risk. Like at an individual level inside of these legacy companies, your incentive is just like, don't get fired.
Yeah.
Like, don't get fired.
Don't get drunk at the company party so that you don't get busted.
and like, just don't take any risks whatsoever. Just like keep this job, keep the checks coming in. And like, it doesn't sound like that big of a problem, but if everyone in a whole society is operating as like, keep your head down, don't get fired, keep the checks coming.
Shut up and dribble.
And at the same time, they're siphoning off like huge chunks of money from the economy. That's how you end up with a static society. And I like the reason I'd be excited for a company like Anduril to succeed is that's not their motive. Like their motive is, we're gonna make all of our employees very wealthy by building brand new generational technology, and like actually taking some risk and having skin in the game. So yeah, I'd be excited for any company like that to be where I put $100 million.
Okay, this is an amazing conversation.
Great conversation.
Yeah, thank you for coming down.
Thank you guys for having me. When do I get all my free clothes? That's what I really came for. I want to get
The
styled
warehouse
out.
is in Vernon.
Well, that we can hook you up with. You just head over to Menlo Club, fill out your sizes, and we'll send you.
I'm like an XL plus.
And you know what's funny is whenever we have guests on, especially from brands, we always say we need a discount code. You guys have like a Flexport discount code for your first shipment out of China? No duties or something?
We used to give away a customs bond, but I haven't worked in the core business in 18 months, so I shouldn't give anything away.
Okay, all right. A free container on your first purchase.
Yeah, totally. If you call Flexport today, a free container.
Just use the code group chat and they'll give you a free container.
Thank you for having me. Great to see you both.
Yeah, no, this was awesome. Thanks, bro. All right, guys, thank you so much. We will see you back here on Thursday. We have another special interview with our buddy Mickey from Mag Park. And yeah, you might be wondering why I'm wearing a $600 hat. You'll find out on Thursday.